We are set to begin a discussion about pop culture stocks. I'm really excited to have both Mary Ellen and Erin here with me today. And, when you think about, or at least when I think about pop culture, I think about a couple of, I think about Investors Business Daily with William O'Neill. I know, Mary Ellen, you worked with him, and they're constantly tracking some of the best stocks. So if a company is going to be one of these pop culture stocks, it's likely to hit that list. I also think back to a really good fund manager back in the 1970s and 1980s, Peter Lynch, who worked for the Fidelity Magellan Fund and produced average annual returns over 29% for 13 years, and did so well that he retired in 1990. He took a fund that was worth, I think, $18 million and took it to $14 billion in the 13 years that he was here or there. And what was interesting is he talked about some of the things that he would look for. And Mary Ellen, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but he looked for just some of the things that were around us every day. Toys R Us and some, names like that you just see were places that you just ordinarily would shop at. And he would take those basic ideas and themes and turn it into great performing fund. So I know you've done, you looked at some of these older stocks, some companies maybe that kind of fit that pop culture theme from prior years. First of all, what do you think about the pop culture show that we're doing here today? And what do you think about some of those older names?
Yeah, I think it's really relevant that people do stay on top of what's popular, because if you go back historically, and I can show you some views here of charts over time that have done really super well. You look at the top 10 performers every decade, and undoubtedly you are going to see a stock that is popular. So here we're looking at RCA. This is back in the 20s. Radio's really picked up in popularity. So in the late 20s, this stock gained 740% in 12 months' time. We're looking here at Condé Nast in 1944. The stock blew up 500%. They were one of the best performing, most popular publications of their time. And then, of course, Mattel stock. This is taking you back to the 1960s, and actually the late 60s. They came out with the Hot Wheels, and that was in addition to good old Barbie came to us in 1959. She was joined by Ken in 62. But from there, it just goes on as far as Mattel, and you can see, again, almost 500% price improvement. So we can go through each various time period. The 1990s, Gap was up over 3,000%. We go into the 2000s, and for those of you that remember UGG boots, they're still very popular right now, but Deckers outdoor up almost 4,000%. So you can, hopefully you're getting a sense of, if you have that ability to stay on top of what's popular. If you're older, I often say, speak to your grandchildren, your children. They're going to tell you what's the latest, greatest, because we can, this is when online trading came on. In the mid-90s, we saw Charles Schwab, E-Trade, all of those stocks up over 2,000+%. Now I'm taking us in. This is a headline actually from IBD, and this is from 2 years ago. And they were talking about how with Instagram and Twitter, everyone taking their photograph, there was a big rise in cosmetic stocks. So we can see, for instance, Estee Lauder from 14-month period was up over 100%. So
yeah, I would just say, if we could just do without selfies. Yeah, I don't know about this whole pop culture thing, but the selfies got to go.
Well, with the makeup too, it's interesting, Tom, because now you can put these filters on. I don't know about you, Mary Ellen, but oh my goodness, the filters take care of all of that, the makeup, everything. Yeah, I've come to very much love that, and I'll do those selfies for sure.
Yeah, I try to stay away from that. But Erin, I know with Decision Point, because you all are a mechanical trading system based on the moving averages and so forth, as things become popular, I guess, Decision Point's going to be able to track that, because as we start to see that money rotate into some key areas of the market, whether it's technology or whatever, your numbers, the moving averages are going to direct you into those areas.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the PMO as well. One of the things we talk about a lot at Decision Point that I think is quite relevant to the pop culture stocks are parabolic moves. Because a lot of these, of course, after an IPO, you almost always see that big move to the upside and then a quick pullback, as the stocks kind of gain their ground. But those are the things that we would look at. And of course, yes, you're going to watch those EMAs and see which way they're going, which ones are tracking, where the price is in regard to it. And of course, the crossovers that we always cover. But the PMO, I think, is fairly useful. It's a little dicey at the beginning, when you don't have the data to actually calculate it properly, but it definitely will give you a feel. My husband, I'll give him a little bit of a shout out. He talks about the pop culture stocks or the things going on, and how does that really shouldn't you be paying close attention to that as far as the charts are concerned? And, yes, but let's face it, I mean, we are technical analysts here, and, Decision Point, like you're talking, there's mechanical signals. There's a lot of that already baked in to the chart.
I'm going to go ahead and show a screen chart. You all probably have heard of this company, Boeing. Mm-hmm. And so, we just think, I don't know, I just take for granted now the airline industry. But, if you go back 50 years, this was an area of the market that clearly was pop culture. I mean, as you were getting, more and more people were starting to fly. I mean, that was new, very new back then. And this is to your point, Erin, Boeing, which I know on a adjusted basis was down at 39 cents. Imagine, going back and telling yourself just to put 39 cents away for Boeing, back in 1968. But initially, you can see this huge pop. I mean, we had almost a 4 times move in Boeing back in 1968 after it went public. And then you can see the next 5 or 6 years were very rocky until finally we got into this long-term uptrend. So I agree. I think, some of these companies just take off. And one that I maybe would also, we could take a look at is Starbucks. Because Starbucks, when it went public, immediately tripled in the first year and a half and never went back down. So these IPOs that do change the way we live, some of them take off and just continue moving higher. And then you have others that need that pullback and, go through maybe a phase of where the market is just throwing all kinds of love at that stock and then needs to settle down for a few years before really we can begin to value these companies. I know personally for me, I don't like to trade these IPOs in the very early days because a lot of times there's so much hype built up that you really need to let these things settle down and be able to study their business model and let the price action kind of move back and forth. But I thought maybe what we could do here, Mary Ellen, is talk a little bit about some of these companies maybe that are newer. And when I say newer, I'm not just talking about in 2019, but I'm literally, instead of going back to the 1960s, maybe there's some companies that you've seen since, say, the internet bubble, the last 20 years, last 2 decades that have really begun to show some relative shine and have been pop culture stocks, and maybe also share some more recent in 2018, 2019. But what do you think?
That's actually a great idea, because when we look at a lot of these IPOs that are out now, we talked earlier about Beyond Meat and some of these others that are really just erratic in their trading. And see if I can go ahead and...
Yeah, Beyond Meat is one that has just been absolutely all over the place.
Exactly, and true to Zoom and some of these other IPOs. So what I have here is a peek at Facebook. They first came public in the mid...
Yeah, I'm not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay. Nope. We'll go ahead and try that again. I was going to take you back to mid-2012 and show you that particular stock. I think we're a little better tuned in here.
There it is.
Super. Okay, yeah. So here we had the initial IPO, and there was quite a bit of hype surrounding Facebook's coming public. It was a very, very popular application. It was very popular among investors, and we can see the anticipation that it did gap up. But from there, it did drop. And this is very typical. We can look at Pinterest. We can look at any number of IPOs this year. The exuberance is quite high, and then it falters a bit. As time moves on, you'll also enter that 90-day period when insiders have the ability to sell. So historically, you are better served with these, unless you're a super short-term trader, you're much better served to hold off and wait to go ahead and enter the stock. And so what I'm showing you here is the beginning of their ascent as far as the stock's price. And the whole reasoning for this big gap up here was all about earnings. The stock gapped up 30% on the release of strong earnings and sales. And that's really what it took, because a lot of this during this period, there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether the company could in fact sustain and grab on to users to the point where they could grow. And all of this was about advertising. Their ad sales spiked. That meant that there was sustainability, and we can see that the stock has then since then gone on to really great heights. And then another one, oh, I'm sorry, we can go back.
No, go ahead. I want to see PayPal, because that was one I know that we had talked about before the show. So why don't you go ahead and go through PayPal?
Yeah, so this is another super popular, this concept that you can now mobily pay for things. This is for whether you were an individual selling products, or now more recently with Venmo, you can move cash around to your friends. But back here, all of this was the company, again, IPO. It went up quite a bit on their initial IPO, then faltered. And it really bounced around quite a bit for some time. This is taking us over a year. And then this big gap up, of course, similar to Facebook, this was the company, the number of users exploded. So the company reported strong earnings, again, a signal to investors that they have a solid, sound foundation. People are really flocking to their product, and the stock since went on. So the bigger point is oftentimes that overexuberance in the beginning, those of you that are super short term, you can play that. But by and large, with most of these IPOs that go on to great heights, oftentimes it'll take about a year, maybe 18 months before they have settled in and proven that they can really sustain their growth path.
Yeah, and I think, we were discussing earlier too, because the GDP is comprised 2/3 consumer spending,
Mm-hmm.
that when you start looking at some of these pop culture stocks, and really whether it's been in the past or as we look into the future, a lot of this is going to be based on where people are spending their money. Because of the huge impact that it has, obviously, in our GDP. I was looking back at some, companies, stocks like VeriSign. It seems like the combination of the consumer spending, but also technology-driven areas. So where you've got companies that maybe combine the two. When I brought up Starbucks, I think that's a perfect example. You think of it, okay, it's a coffee shop. They sell food. It's a restaurant. But it's actually a little bit more than that. It became really a cult, and I'm part of it. I mean, I write my blog every day from Starbucks, and it's a place where you don't just hang out and have a cup of coffee or get your coffee and go. Some people do that, but there's also a group of people that actually it became a part of their life. We switched from going to work every day. A lot of folks obviously still do that, but there's a much larger group now that telecommute and work from home, and so they've found a place at, say, a Starbucks to be able to work into.
And Starbucks has really capitalized on that. The growth with that company is tremendous. They're continuing to expand and evolve. So that's actually a very good example. I don't know if you can see my screen, but what I have here is a tech timeline. And so again, this is all going to be consumer driven. And Erin, do you recall we talked about BlackBerry? It used to be called Crackberry. When they came out, and the stock really exploded. This is an example, however, of something that we are going to talk about, how oftentimes these fads, these more popular stocks, they don't all last. There are those handful and those few that Google, prime example, came out in 98 and is very, very in a sustainable uptrend. But all of these within these technology is Apple, the iPhone, the iPod. So all of these technology companies that have been able to sustain their uptrends and their growth capabilities, those companies have been able to evolve. And I think Apple is probably one of the most prime. And Erin, you were talking about that earlier as well, as far as their product developments and starting out with their Apple computer back in the 80s.
Yeah, Erin,
then,
actually, I want to switch over to you. Maybe you have some companies you can share with everybody, some maybe newer ones that you follow. I know you're much more into the social media scene than I am, for sure. So maybe there's some companies you can share there. Erin, did you have any thoughts on some of the newer companies?
Well, I know that, Snapchat, big one, when that came out as an IPO. I mean, my kids are both of them, well, they're in their 20s. And they basically, that was where you migrated from. Facebook is now, your mother's app. It's not the cool thing. Snapchat sort of took that over, with Instagram. Funko, I think, was one we were talking about. I don't get it.
Erin, could you pull your charts up and show everybody as you're going?
Actually, let me get that. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
So this is one that I was looking at, Build-A-Bear. I was actually kind of shocked that it's still around. I was involved in it, obviously, when my girls were young. And again, you have these big moves up. The fad sort of, moves out, and you have that sort of period here where we didn't get much going on. But then there you go again. It's these parabolic moves. I mean, the fad stocks you just have to be careful about. I mean, we could talk about stocks that, the dot-com crash, of course, there's lists and lists of those. But, Krispy Kreme donuts, some of these companies that went public that just didn't really stick around. And like I said, Funko was one.
How can you go wrong with a donut? Right?
No. Well, it was a fad though, right? It was super popular. Everybody it was so exciting. And then, as with fads that we have to watch out for, it failed. It just, people got bored.
I think too with Krispy Kreme, it's funny, you go from a Krispy Kreme and now we're with Beyond Meat.
So right.
We're kind of going all over the place here.
Look at this. This is Funko. This is pretty much right on par with what we're talking about. They get their initial offering at, you've got this big bar in the beginning, and then you get that parabolic move. And then when parabolics, as we always talk about at Decision Point, when they fail, they usually fail hard and drop very quickly, very fast. So what we always recommend with parabolics is a trailing stop. That might be something to consider if you're starting to trade these fad stocks.
Yeah, and for those, I was just going to say, for those of you not familiar, Funko makes bobbleheads of popular cultural figures, both sports world, entertainment, and so forth. And I don't get it. I really don't. But everybody's sharing their wizard, app. Harry Potter, they're sharing their codes all over Facebook and everywhere else. I mean, it's just one of those things.
But that raises a great question. I mean, when you look at these stocks, I mean, I'm sure if you looked at a Starbucks chart 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you would say, oh my gosh, this is in a parabolic. And yet it turned out that if you had still bought it, you would have done very well. So when you look at these stocks and we start thinking that they're game changers and life changers, how do you know the difference between if it's just a short-term fad or if you should be putting your money in? I mean, is there thought?
Yeah, I think there definitely are, and this is something that Bill O'Neill spoke about quite a bit. We can even talk about Walmart when they first came out, a total game changer as far as big box store offering products at lower pricing. And the big shift there was strong management. You had Sam Walton, and even at Starbucks, their founder, very, very strong management, and then also continued earnings growth and evolution as far as
great customer service too. Let me throw that in there.
But you can watch the chart, like we were saying earlier. I mean, it is a fad stock, maybe, but watch the chart. watch those EMAs, watch the PMO. It should give you, chart patterns, parabolics. It should give you a little bit of a hint as to where to go without having to necessarily know what Pinterest is or whether it's going to be a staying power. I mean, you get a lot of it just out of the chart. That's what I always preach, hey, tell me about this company. I'm like, let me see the chart. Yep. I don't want to give you my opinion until I pull up my phone and my lovely StockCharts app and go, oh, see, here's the chart. And that's what this is telling me. I don't necessarily pay so much attention to the story because a lot of that, like I said, is baked into the chart. You watch the chart, it's going to help you even if you don't know what the fad is. Like I said, Bunko, totally, I don't get it.
I would also throw in there, I mean, if you watch the scooter scores, the scooter rank that we have at StockCharts, it's an exclusive feature here at StockCharts. And I just pulled up the scooter reports for mid-cap stocks, typed in technology, and you look at the list, and these are the companies that are performing the best relative to their peers in the group. So you're looking at technology stocks and comparing which ones are performing well relative to the others. In the top of the list, this is one of the stocks that we added and put it on the poll today, Roku. It's got a scooter rank score, and I know earlier today it was down, and I think it's having a little bit of a rough week. But this is a company that has performed extremely well, and it stays at the top of this list. So if a company comes out and you're concerned about, okay, is it a fad or is it something that could be longer lasting? Well, one thing you want to do is see where the money is going. Obviously, if it's a fad, it's going up. If it's long-term, it's going up. But if this scooter rank score stays high, even when it pulls back, if you see a scooter drop to maybe 70, 75, and then once again, we see that money rotate back in, I think that's giving you some heads up that, hey, Wall Street believes that this is more than just a fad. So,
and I was going to add to that. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go right ahead.
And so Shopify, that is another classic popular pop culture in the sense that they provide a cloud software-based platform for enterprise, for entrepreneurs who have products they want to sell. Kylie Kardashian has her site on there, and Shopify is a fantastic company. Growth prospects are phenomenal. So I think we were talking before, as far as investors, where would you search for these pop culture, popular? And Tom, you're spot on with technology, and I would say consumer discretionary. Those are going to be your two areas over time, historically, where these higher performing stocks that are being driven by consumer demand. That's the area.
Yeah, and I think too the media is going to focus on those areas as well. I mean, you're not going to get a lot of excitement out of the industrials or the financials. I mean, even though you mentioned a company like PayPal, which has kind of transformed some things in financials, I agree with you. I think that because there's so much money spent in that consumer area, that it's going to be very difficult to have something that really changes the way we do things. It doesn't at least have some tentacles in consumer discretionary. I thought maybe what we would do, because we still have a few minutes here, is maybe each of you can talk a little bit about some of these stocks that we have on today's poll and just kind of give your thoughts before we bring the poll up as to which ones maybe impact you the most, or if maybe you have some opinions based on the charts. But Mary Ellen, why don't we start with you? Looking at the stocks that are in the poll, which ones strike you as maybe a stock that might have some staying power here?
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen here.
And I want everybody to go in and complete that poll, because I really would like to see what everyone else is thinking. But we have, your screen didn't come up there, Mary Ellen.
Oh boy, I'm having screen issues today. Erin, do you mind grabbing it? And I'll
have all of them in a candle glance right now.
Wonderful.
There we go. Not super big, so I'll go ahead and we can look at it 10 per page. And of course, with some of these new ones, Beyond Meat being one of them, we don't have a whole lot of data there. But to me, this is showing me exactly what we're talking about. The IPO comes out and you get that parabolic move, starts to come down, and then it finds its trading zone. And then we wait until something happens and the earnings or whatever it turns out to be, and then you get in.
Do you have one of the? I mean, we've got Beyond Meat, Pinterest, Roku, DocuSign, Spotify, and Etsy. I mean, is there one that just kind of appeals to you? Let's, forgetting about the charts, and just your own personal life and the things that you see and what your kids are into. Is there one that kind of stands out to you that maybe, is something to maybe watch if we just ignored the price action and just said this is a great concept?
Right. Well, I honestly, if you're going that direction, I would go for the more boring of all of these, which is DocuSign. I know I used it to buy my house. You've been in the process of purchasing, so you've used it, and it's time saving. It's just one of those things I think you'll always need. I mean, it's not totally faddish if you want to go there.
Yeah, I remember when Google first came out. And I used to sit there and think, okay, how are they going to make money? I mean, I just type in a topic
Right.
search, and I'm like, this is not a good business model. I don't get it. And of course, it's come out to be one of the largest companies in terms of market valuation in the world. But Mary Ellen, kind of sticking to that same theme of these 6 stocks, not necessarily, based on your moving averages or anything else. Is there something that you use or that, maybe family or friends, that you hear about, or maybe you've
seen? Yeah, I would say, and Erin, actually, I'm surprised you didn't talk about it, but Etsy is just a very popular product. This is an online platform, again, that allows craftsy individuals to sell their products. And they're renowned for their high quality. They also have the rankings. Tom, you talked about customer service. Each of the sellers are rated, and their products are really, really just very creative and very, they have vintage as well as current goods. And the company's growing. They actually increased, if you have your products online with them, you do need to pay a 5% fee on what you sell. They raised that about a year ago, and it has not looked back since. They're renowned. Management is great. They are always updating their technology there. So I would think Etsy is certainly one to keep an eye on. It's not having such a great week, but longer term.
Oh, yeah. Stitch would be the other. I just don't know that it has staying power, but I use it. I've been using it for like over 2 years because I just don't have time to dress myself. So they give me those latest trends and everything, but I couldn't vote for that just because I'm not so certain about the staying power, mainly because of the competition.
They're finally coming around. Analysts are really starting to upgrade Stitch Fix. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's go ahead.
I'm going to go with Roku. That to me, when you get back to the way things are transforming. I mean, it used to be that Disney had its pictures, and you would go to the movie theater and you'd watch a Disney movie or whatever. And I just see a major transformation that is taking place right now among consumers with Netflix, Amazon, Disney. Recently coming out with their announcement that $6.99 a month deal. What is it, Disney Plus or whatever the heck they call it. And I think Roku, I think all these bigger companies are justifying the future. I mean, they're basically confirming that this is the future going forward. And Roku is one of those companies that's just it's big enough to kind of throw its weight around a little bit, but it's small enough to have a lot of potential growth going forward. So when I look at Roku versus a Netflix, I think Roku, because of the tremendous upside that this company could have. They seem to be hitting on all cylinders. They've been coming out with some really good numbers. Analysts I know have been raising estimates, lots of upgrades. So of the stocks on this list, I'm going to agree with the overall audience. The poll is up on the screen now. But I think Roku would be my choice of these 6 going forward. And I think they're all interesting, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I had Roku not low on my list, but lower. I haven't studied all their products, so I'm only making just a general thing. But Roku was, the big thing was getting the sticks, like the Fire Stick from Amazon. But I feel like they compete a lot with Apple and Amazon, and that could be a problem for them. But if they stay innovative, with their products, then yes, they have a nice niche market. But
you
I
raise
worry about the competition there.
You raise a good point, though, because sometimes how do you get rid of your competition? You buy them.
Right.
You look
That's
at
what we've seen on a lot of these, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Instagram bought out by Facebook. Yeah, that was a great purchase.
Yep. So, if you get a company like an Amazon who starts to feel like you got a smaller company, Roku nibbling at your heels, sometimes the best thing to do is just throw money at them and bring them on board.
Right.
That gets rid of your competition. And some of these companies, I mean, the Amazons, the Apples, and the Googles, I'm still wondering at some point maybe if there's going to be some antitrust issues going on there because these companies are getting so big.
Right.
And they do. I mean, sometimes they just buy out their competition, and all of a sudden, what competition? So anyhow, I thought that was a really great segment. I want to thank both of you and thank the audience.
Yes.
Thank the audience for participating as well.